There was an American guy I used to speak to in my boxing group years ago who was very high on Anthony Joshua early on in his career. And he was very rarely complimentary of British fighters. But when it came to Anthony Joshua, he saw his amateur bouts, I'm assuming in the Olympics, at least some of them, and he saw his early professional bouts. And he said at the time, and I think Deontay Wilder was champion at that stage, he said at the time that he would pick AJ to slump Deontay Wilder right now. And he described Anthony Joshua as like a bigger version of Evander Holyfield. That's how he described him stylistically. Now, AJ's style has changed over the years. The version of AJ he was talking about was the version who knocked out Gary Cornish. This was prior to facing Dillian Whyte. He may have changed his mind, and I know he has changed his mind about Anthony Joshua over the years, but at that time, prior to facing Dillian Whyte, he was comparing him to like a bigger version of Holyfield in style, and he was impressed with him. Now, Evander Holyfield has had some things to say about Anthony Joshua, and in terms of the comparison, by the way, comparing AJ to Holyfield, there are some similarities. They're obviously both muscular guys. AJ's, again, bigger. They both have good coordination. They both have very good balance. That's one thing about Anthony Joshua since the amateurs. He's always been a very well-balanced guy. So I can see some similarities. But Holyfield, pound for pound, was a better fighter, a tougher fighter, both in terms of punch resistance and in terms of mindset and heart. So I guess that's where the comparisons end, right? Oh, another comparison would be combination punching. Holyfield was a great combination puncher. Anthony Joshua, not as good as Holyfield in that department, and you wouldn't expect him to be, given the fact he's much bigger, but he's still a good combination puncher. Shortens his shots up very, very well. Nice uppercut. Holyfield had a nice uppercut. If you want to see what Evander Holyfield's uppercut was all about, go and watch his fight with Burt Cooper. Holyfield does get decked in that fight. It's the first time in his pro career that he took a count. But he hits Burt Cooper with an insane amount of uppercuts and great combinations. He keeps throwing a left-right, and then he follows up with a right uppercut, and then sometimes it's a right uppercut, left uppercut, and then he'll shoot a left hook to the body straight afterwards. Beautiful combination punching by Evander Holyfield. That was really Holyfield at his peak, where he was firing on all cylinders. The foot speed was there. The hand speed was really good. The Holyfield who fought Tyson was nowhere near as fast as the Holyfield who fought George Foreman, Burt Cooper, and even Riddick Bowe the first time. Yeah, that Holyfield was a lot more mobile and sharp. Anyway, Holyfield had the following to say about Anthony Joshua. He said, quote, "Anthony Joshua is a good fighter, but if you don't throw enough punches, you don't use your size to your advantage. He is a big guy. He's got to use the jab. Everyone knew Stevenson had a great jab, and that's pretty much what he is throwing." It says here in brackets that Holyfield was talking about Adonis Stevenson, but he goes on to say, quote, "Every time he catches you asleep with the jab, then you get hit, with a right hand, and you're out of there." Well, Adonis Stevenson was a southpaw, and it was the left hand. So is he talking about Teofilo Stevenson, the great amateur from Holyfield's generation from Cuba? Anyway, goes on to say, Anthony Joshua can pretty much do the same thing. He is big and large and a good fighter. He actually can box, but he has to be a bit more aggressive. You have to use your size to your advantage. Sometimes he gets with a guy, he won't overbear him, he won't push you down, but they are trying to push him down. You have to play the game outright to not let somebody out-hustle you, unquote. Those are the words of Evander the Real Deal Holyfield. And I guess another comparison you could make between AJ and Holyfield, at least allegedly, is the use of substances to aid their performance. Because AJ's been accused by Dillian Whyte and others of having a TUE for testosterone, right? Testosterone replacement therapy, TRT. And boxing fans have speculated that he could be on all sorts of other stuff as well. But, I don't want to go there because from a legal perspective, I want to stick to what he's actually been publicly accused of by other people. So I can put the onus on them, not on me, right? And when it comes to Evander Holyfield, well, we all heard about, or most of us heard about, the infamous Evan Fields incident. Right? So when you look at Holyfield's physique, he was actually shorter as a cruiserweight than he was as a heavyweight. Now, bear in mind, he moved up to heavyweight from cruiserweight when he was in his mid to late 20s. So you're a cruiserweight and you're 6'1", and then you move up to heavyweight and you're 6'2.5". Look, regardless of all the speculation, and there's been loads of it about Holyfield over the years, he never tested positive for anything. With that being said, PED testing back in the 90s was, I don't want to say non-existent, but it was very, very lax compared to what exists in many fights today. And I remember watching an interview with somebody from the Nevada State Athletic Commission. Bear in mind, Las Vegas back then, Nevada, was host to a far higher percentage of the big fights in boxing than it is today. Vegas is still a factor, but it's not as much of a factor as it was back in the 1990s. It was really all about Vegas then. In fact, there was a time when there hadn't been any major boxing events at Madison Square Garden for many, many years. Yeah, they went through what's the word I'm looking for? They went through a lull where there wasn't many boxing events there. It was very Vegas-centric back in the days. And anyway, this person who, I'm not sure if he was the commissioner, but he was someone high up in the Nevada State Athletic Commission. I saw this interview with him and he said that they never started testing for steroids in Nevada up until the early 2000s. That's crazy. What on earth were they testing for then? And by the way, the only testing they were doing in most instances was testing the fighters after the fight. And of course, the way that modern PEDs are used with the cycling on and off, that's not going to catch many people when you tested them after the fight, right? But back then, the testing methods weren't as sophisticated, but neither were the methods used by the fighters on the PEDs. They weren't maybe as sophisticated when it comes to cycling off and all this kind of thing because they felt like they didn't have to be due to the lax testing protocol. So anyway, I did have to put that in there. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below with regards to Holyfield's advice to Anthony Joshua. Throw more punches, use your size. I guess it sounds like common sense is what most people have been saying for the longest time. Will Anthony Joshua be able to implement it? Maybe he doesn't have it where it counts most, and that's in the mind and in the heart. Maybe. I'm not saying definitively. But when a guy has all the physical ability but doesn't have it upstairs and in the heart, then sometimes those guys are a write-off. Sometimes those guys are just wasted potential, and that's what they go down as. And there are many people who believe that Anthony Joshua's run is over, that Anthony Joshua will never become a world champion again. Anthony Joshua will never have a significant win for the rest of his career. And many even believe that Anthony Joshua is actually 1 or 2 fights away from retirement. Can he come back? The perception of boxing fans has been turned on its head many times in the past. So when Muhammad Ali lost to Joe Frazier, and he lost comprehensively in the first fight, then he lost to Ken Norton. After the first Norton loss, many people thought that Ali was finished. He was done. That, yeah, he had a decent run in the 1960s before his hiatus from boxing, but since coming back, he hasn't been the same and he's finished. People wrote him off. He managed to beat Norton in the rematch. People were like, oh, okay, beat Norton, but, whatever. Then they saw George Foreman wipe Frazier and Norton out, and they said, well, there you go. Ali's definitely finished now. This guy Foreman's come along. He's destroying guys who beat Ali. It's a wrap for the guy. And Ali went in there and did the impossible in Zaire and beat George Foreman. It was a huge shock to people at the time. The perception was Ali was going to get weighed in early. Okay? So you fast forward to Evander Holyfield. Many years later, after he got beat by Riddick Bowe, he came back, fought Alex Stewart, then had the rematch with Riddick Bowe, and people felt as though the rematch would be easier for Bowe than the first fight, because in the first fight, that was his first contest at that level against an opponent of that caliber, and he nearly got Holyfield out of there in that 10th round and the 11th round as well. And the two defenses that Riddick Bowe had after beating Holyfield were both first-round knockout wins against Michael Dokes and Jesse Ferguson. In fact, I think the Ferguson was a one-round job rather than it might have been a two-round job, but I'm sure Michael Dokes' fight was a one-round job. Ferguson might have been 2 rounds rather than 1 round. I forget now, but it was very early. So he just blasted these guys. And by the way, they were really poor defenses of the undisputed title. We have to say that. Evander Holyfield looked like he was finished in the eyes of many people after the first Bowe fight. Came back against Alex Stewart, didn't look good. Wins the rematch against Bowe. Shocks the world. People didn't expect that. But then he loses to Michael Moorer, has a couple more fights. He was written off against Mike Tyson in 1996. Don King thought it was an easy fight for Tyson. Being Tyson's promoter at the time, he thought that Holyfield was just a knockover job. It would be like Michael Spinks all over again. Everybody thought Holyfield was done. But he pulled off the impossible. One of the biggest upsets in boxing history. So, yeah, that just shows how the perception boxing fans have, particularly in the heavyweight division, can get turned on its head. So I learned not to write off talented fighters who have been at the top for a long time, fighters who haven't taken that much punishment. And Holyfield took way more punishment in his career at the point when he beat Mike Tyson than AJ's taken at this stage. But of course, people are going to say it comes back to the heart and the mindset. And one thing Holyfield always had a massive heart and a good chin and great powers of recovery. The kind of powers of recovery that AJ could only dream of. Anyway, I'll leave it there, meandering on. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below.